And I think, no, it's going. Okay, Nida, would you put your lovely face up there? Hello, hello, she's there. This is Nida Brown, and she's from the Old Tunnel State Park near Comfort, Texas. And if you've not been there, I'm sure we can, the best thing to do is to get a map because it's not exactly on the highway, but it is a wonderful trip out to see the bat emergences that happen during the summer. She'll tell you more about that. She's going to talk to us tonight about the different species of bats in Texas, their habits and their habitats. There's quite a bit of diversity here, and of course their importance to environment. Just like the birds, they have their role in the environment, and it is a very, very important one. Well, Nida got her master's degree in applied geography. That's an interesting area of study with an emphasis on environmental education. She went to Texas State University, and she's worked at the Old Tunnel State Park since 2005. She started as a wildlife biologist with the Wildlife Division, and now she's in the Parks Division and the superintendent of, I forgot to put your picture up here, Nida. There's all your bats coming out at the Old Tunnel State Park. And after you hear Nida's talk tonight, I'm sure you're going to want to hustle out there. There's some restrictions this year because of the pandemic, but it's just a wonderful experience to go out there. She has traveled to other locations into Texas to conduct bat research, especially out to Big Bend, where there is just such a great diversity of bats. So sit back and relax and go batty with Nida. And at the end, if you have questions as Nida presents, please put them in the chat room or the chat box. And at the end, we'll go through them and try to cover as many as possible. And that's it. So thank you, Nida, and it's all yours.
Awesome.
I'm going to stop my share so you can start yours.
Okay. All right. Is everybody seeing that? I guess let me put myself back up here again.
Yes, I can see you, and I can see you.
All right, awesome. So I'm gonna drag this down just a little to get it out of the way. Well, I'm happy to be here, and I'm always excited to talk about bats to everyone. Especially these days, I think bats are getting a bad rap, as they often have done in the past. So we're gonna just kind of give a little introduction to bats. We'll talk about bats around the world, and then we'll talk about some of the bats here in Texas as well. As Patsy mentioned, I do work at Old Tunnel State Park. Hopefully, if you haven't been there before, you'll take a chance to come out and visit us this summer. It's an old abandoned railroad tunnel that was in operation. The railroad was in operation from 1913 until 1941. And then when the train stopped running sometime after that, bats decided the tunnel would be a really cool place to hang out. And every summer we have about 3 million bats that come and roost inside the tunnel. And every night, I'm sure all of you are familiar with maybe going to watch bats somewhere come out of a cave or from underneath a bridge. But this is what our bat emergence looks like. And I'm going to share this screen. Just give me a second. All right. Did everybody see that? Patsy, maybe you can be the one to tell me if you don't see the video that I'm showing. So this is basically,
yes, did you
see that? Cool. I'm going to play it one more time. So this is basically, I tell everyone that it looks like we have a bat NATO going on at Old Tunnel. It's pretty amazing to see. As I stated, if you haven't gone somewhere to watch the bats, you should definitely take the opportunity to go and check out our bat emergence. So all around the world, Bats live everywhere we would want to live because they can find the things they need to survive in those types of places. So they live everywhere except for some remote islands, and of course where it's too cold or too hot. So where it's extremely cold, like in Antarctica or in some of the extreme desert places, the bats aren't going to live there because they can't find the things they need to survive. But what's amazing about all these species is check out how many there are. When I first started working for Parks and Wildlife, that number of bats was only around 1,337 or something like that. So what's amazing to me is in 16 years, we have discovered new bat species. Now, some of those are because we have discovered subspecies of species we already knew about, and it's based on taxidermy specimens that are found in museums and things. But we're also getting to go out and do research in places where we never were able to research before. And so they have also discovered brand new species of mammals that they've never been seen before, which I just think is amazing. And what's really cool about all of these 1,397 species is they all look very different from one another. So I'm just going to show you a few that I think are pretty cool. This little guy right here is found in Mexico. A lot of the common names that we call bats by has to do with what they look like on the outside. And if you check this guy out, he's got these really funky looking ears, right? And so they named him the Mexican funnel-eared bat. So if I turned him upside down, it looks like you could use his ears to pour something down like a funnel to drain it into something smaller. Also got this really beautiful orange fur, and you'll notice these little tiny beady eyes. A lot of the bats like we have here in Texas, we call them micro bats because they're smaller. I'll show you some of the macro bats in a minute. And a lot of those bats have these little tiny eyes. And so people assumed that because bats fly at night, as you guys all know, and they have these little tiny eyes, a lot of people thought that bats were blind. But when they started studying bats closely, they found that they can see just as well as we can. But because they're looking for, most of them around our area are looking for little tiny insects to eat in the dark, they need echolocation to help them find their food. But bats aren't blind. So if you hear that saying blind as a bat, you can tell people that that's just not true. And then there are bats that have really funky looking noses. Check these two guys out. This one over here is called the sword-nosed bat. And if you look really closely at this guy, he's got this hair growing off of this appendage on his nose. This is the striped hairy-nosed bat. And these two things on their faces, on their nose, they're actually adaptations that these bats have that help them with their echolocation calls. They're called nose leaves. These two bats, when they make their echolocation sounds, instead of making them through their mouth, like most bats do, they make the sound through their nose. And the sound travels up their nose leaf, and they can point it in the direction their prey is going, and it helps them track down their food. So it's another really cool adaptation that these bats have that help them find the food that they want to look for. And then there are bats that have really cool hairdos. Check this guy out. He's got this cool looking mohawk. You guys are seeing his profile of his face. So here's his ear, here's his eye, here's his nose. This is the Chapin's free-tailed bat, and this happens to be the male species. I know all of you guys are birders, and you know how birds, the male is prettier than the female, and oftentimes the male birds will display their feathers and do little dances sometimes to attract the female birds. Well, this guy thinks his mohawk is attractive to the lady bats, and he displays it during mating season to attract the female bats to him. So another cool adaptation that some bats have. And then there are bats that look like other animals. This one is found in Australia. He's got these kind of cool looking bunny rabbit looking ears. And he also has a nose leaf, as you guys can see right here. This is a bat, even though insectivores, we would kind of consider them to be meat eaters, this one is what we call a true carnivore. He will eat small birds, sorry about that, birders, and he also eats other kinds of bats on occasion. This is the Australian ghost-faced bat. And then we also have some bats that are really cute. If you guys ever go to the zoo or you watch a nature show on TV, these are usually the ones that you see hanging out in those places. They have these kind of fox-like faces and bigger eyes, hence the name. They're called flying foxes. They're fruit eaters. They're found in a lot of places where it's a lot more tropical than what we have here in the United States. And then in comparison, this is a bat that I tell people, especially when I'm giving programs for adults, this bat proves that wrinkles are good. This is the wrinkle-faced bat. And if you all see, a lot of the bats that I've shown you, if you look really closely at their faces, they have all these folds of skin and wrinkles on their faces. And it's really important to these bats because they absorb sound. So it is also an adaptation. These bats send out their echolocation calls, the sound comes back and it's absorbed up into these wrinkles on their face, and it helps the sound get up to their ears. So without those wrinkles, he'd have a harder time finding the food that he's looking for. So another really cool bat species. And then this little guy right here, when I was speaking about a recent species being discovered, this bat was found in Africa within the last 10 years. This bat and the next one I'm going to show you were discovered by a scientist. He was a fan of Star Wars, so he named this one the Yoda bat. You guys can see if you agree with that or not. I think if you check out his nose, that he looks a lot more like Shrek, not so much like Yoda. And then we have the other bat that was found in Africa within the last 10 years, and he's called the Chewbacca bat. So again, this is something I like to tell kids, which I think is amazing, is that we are still discovering new animal species, which I think is just something fantastic and kind of cool to think about, to encourage kids to maybe want to grow up and get out there and get to study some animals as well. And then one last bat species, just to show you the variety. A lot of what I've shown you it has to do with their facial characteristics, but then there are bats that have other adaptations depending on where they're found. It can help them in their environments that they live in. This one is the yellow-winged bat. So different colorations can help with camouflage and things like that. You'll notice this bat has some really cool looking ears. So all of these bats are really beautiful, have a lot of really cool physical characteristics. And these are just a few of, remember, the 1,397 that are out there. And then to give you a little more variety, this is the smallest bat in the world. It's called the bumblebee bat, and it's found in Thailand. And the body size of this bat, the body is about as big as a jelly bean. And when the wings are open, they're only about this long. So it looks like a little butterfly when it's flying around. You can see I could set it on my thumb, and it could sit there with no problem, as you see in this picture right here. Really very cool bat. In comparison to the flying foxes, like we talked about earlier, the largest flying fox is found in Indonesia, and it can have up to a 6-foot wingspan. So that's longer. You know, you can't see all of me, but that's longer than I can stretch my arms. So really amazing to think about these huge bats flying around. Nowhere near that big here in Texas. We'll talk about the largest bat in Texas in just a little bit. These again are found in tropical places. So here are some of the things that I'm sure you've heard at least one of these misconceptions about bats. We already talked about that a lot of people, even today, they still think that bats are blind. A lot of that has to do with because they know they use echolocation, so they think that that means that they can't see. That all bats are vampire bats. And we do have vampire bats only found in Central America and South America, none here in the United States. This one happens to bother me a lot. People have a negative view of mice. And so when people say that they're just mice with wings, I like to point out that genetic research has shown that bats are more closely related to dolphins than they are to mice. And everybody thinks of dolphins as cool and cute. And you think about the correlation between dolphins using echolocation just like bats do, which is kind of cool. And then, of course, it's not just rabies. You know, these days, bats are getting blamed for many diseases. All bats do not have rabies. All bats do not carry rabies. They can get rabies just like any other mammal because they're mammals. But if you think about all those thousands of species with millions of individuals, 0.5% would have rabies. So it's a very small percentage when you think about how many bats there are in the world. And also, just to address the COVID virus and Ebola, there are many animals that are reservoirs for diseases, and bats can be a reservoir for diseases, but there has been no proof that a bat somehow transferred COVID or Ebola onto humans. You have to look at all the conditions that those animals were kept in China for the COVID virus, and they were eating meat that wasn't cooked properly. So it's not like a bat went out and attacked someone and that's how the virus got transferred. So you have to think about these things when people talk about these misconceptions. Now here's some of the cool things about bats. They're the only mammal capable of true flight. They are also, most bat species only give birth to one pup a year, so they can become endangered and the numbers can diminish pretty quickly if there's a big die-off from disease or something like that. They can live a really long time. This oldest bat right here, this is a pretty cool story. It was captured in Russia and they tagged it and released it, and they caught it again in the wild, which is hard to do. And they aged that bat to be 41 years old. So bats can be very long-lived. They're also really clean. If you were to watch a video of bats in the roost, they clean themselves like cats do. I've seen a mother bat use her little claws to comb through her pup's fur when the fur is coming in. They keep their pups really clean. So all these things are kind of really cool things to think about bats. Now another similarity between us and bats, we're mammals. Bats are mammals. Something that scientists discovered when they were trying to figure out what scientific name to give the bat, they saw how similar the bones in a bat's wing are to our human hand. So if you take a look at our hand and you look at the bat's wing, they have thumbs just like we do. They also have 4 finger bones that extend down through their wing membrane. And then if you look really closely here, they have digits. So bats have the ability to bend and fold their bones. And they can fly. They fly differently than birds because they can manipulate their wings, which helps them dart around things really quickly. So scientists named the order of the bat Chiroptera. That name means hand wing. And if you compared other features of the bat skeleton, if you look at their rib cage, also very similar to our rib cage. There is a big difference though. If you look at, I don't want you to really concentrate on their legs in this picture because I took a picture of a pressed skeleton. Bats' feet are different from ours. Instead of facing forwards like ours do, bats' feet face backwards. And it's a really important adaptation for bats because it gives them that ability to cling to a surface and to roost there. And when they hang on the surface, they're in a relaxed position. And that all has to do with their bone structure. Now, getting into the orders of the bat, I talked about here in Texas, we mostly have microbats. And that's what we have in the United States. The megabats are the flying foxes, and those are the ones that can get really big, but they do come in all sizes. So we have 2 suborders under that Chiroptera, the Megachiroptera and the Microchiroptera. And I talked a little bit about echolocation, and I'm assuming most of you have probably seen, if you haven't been somewhere to see a whole bunch of bats, you've probably seen at least one flying around. And a lot of people think that they are going to hear a lot of sound with 3 million bats all coming out of the tunnel. But there's very little sound at all, except for their wings fluttering. It sounds like falling water as they're flying out, and they produce a lot of wind, but they don't make a lot of vocalizations. And the echolocation calls that they make, most of bats echolocate above the range that we can hear. But scientists wanted to be able to study bats without having to capture them. So they invented machines. Very simply, we call them bat detectors. And what it does is it slows down the rate of the echolocation call to a sound that we could hear. And when you get really good, just like all of you guys, I'm sure you're all wonderful birders and you can identify birds by their calls. When you get really good, you can identify a bat by the echolocation call that it makes. So if you notice, this diagram shows you they're constantly sending out these echolocation calls and it bounces off everything in front of them. And when that call comes back to them, it kind of gives that bat a mental image of what the sound bounced off of. And they say, oh, that's a tree, or that's a person. They don't know that that's a tree or a person, but they know that it's something they don't want to eat. But when they figure out that the sound bounced off something they want to eat, they speed up these pulses of sound to 200 pulses a second. And when you're listening in on the bat detector, it makes a buzz, buzzing noise. And we call that a feeding buzz. And hopefully you guys can kind of hear this sound. I think I shared my sound. Let's listen in. This is a bat echolocating. It has a kind of sounds like a monkey.
We can hear it. We can hear it.
Can you hear it?
Yeah, we can hear it.
Oh, yay, good. So that is one Mexican free-tailed bat echolocating at different ranges. So it's hard to imagine that you can identify the bat, but what you do is you make a call library of all these echolocation calls, and then you can compare these sounds, and that helps you identify the bat. And when you get really experienced, just like you guys, after you've birded for a while, you get to know the sounds that they make. And so when you hear it on the bat detector, you can say, oh yeah, that's a Mexican free-tailed bat by the echolocation sound it makes. So it's another great way that we can study bats without actually having to capture them and see them in our hands. And also echolocation is a great thing for bats to help them chase after these little tiny insects in the dark. One other fact about echolocation is I always ask kids, do all bats have to echolocate to find their food? And you have to think about what they're eating. So most of our bats in Texas are insectivores. So their food is moving around. So they need echolocation because they're having to track it down. But fruit-eating bats, their fruit's not flying around. So they don't have to use echolocation. They find their fruit by sight because they can see bright colors and they can smell the fruit that they want to feed on. And speaking of food, bats eat a variety of things. There are bats that contribute to everything that you guys see in this picture. 77 different kinds of fruits and vegetables bats have made a contribution to, mostly because they're eating insects that affect these crops, which we'll talk about a little bit more in just a second. But again, the fruit-eating bats, they make a big difference in the places where they're found because they eat the fruit, and many of those seeds oftentimes will fall out of their mouths onto the ground or pass through their digestive system while they're flying around areas in these forested places, and they're helping regrow these forested areas. To give you an example, there's a bat in West Africa called the hammer-headed fruit bat, and they say that it's responsible for 98% of forestry growth because it spreads so many seeds when they're flying. So these fruit bats are really important. Also, not only are they spreading the seeds, they're fertilizing them on the way out because bat guano, as you also might know, is a really great fertilizer, very rich in nitrates. So another important reason for these fruit bats to help with the environment. Now here in Texas, as I mentioned, we don't have fruit bats, but we do have a couple of nectar feeders. These are two of my favorite Texas bat species found along the border of Mexico and Texas. This one is called the Mexican long-nosed bat. And you'll notice that these nectar feeding bats have adaptations. You can compare them to a hummingbird. Their face is elongated so that it can fit way down into this cactus flower, like you see here. The nectar is way down here at the base of the flower. So they have to stick their face down in there in order to get to the nectar, and they're going to get covered in pollen. So very important to pollination. If you notice in this previous screen, this is a cactus, as you can see. A lot of our cactus flowers in the southwestern part of the United States, the flowers bloom at nighttime, and then in the early morning hours, those blooms will close up. So if bats weren't around, a lot of our cactus would not survive. Because the flowers wouldn't get pollinated. Now, what's really amazing is when we go out and we do surveys on these bats, I'm gonna need to share my screen here again just a second. This is a video of one of the lesser long-nosed bat, which is also a nectar feeder. And you'll notice another adaptation that they have. Really cool long tongue. So when we have these bats and we're doing surveys on them, we feed them a little bit of sugar water before we let them go. Really, really awesome bat. something I like to brag about
Okay.
because of conservation efforts. The two species that, here we go. The two species of nectar feeding bats were on the endangered species list, but because of conservation efforts, one of them has been taken off the endangered species list, which I think is something that is cool to brag about. There are other states that they're found in, and different conservation agencies have worked to protect the areas where these bats hang out. So habitat loss is a big issue for many animals, bats included, and because of efforts, they have been protected. And then I think you guys will appreciate this. This next video that I'm going to share with you, I had a friend who had a hummingbird feeder that she kept filling up every night, and she would go in the morning and her hummingbird feeder would be empty. And she couldn't figure out what was going on, so we set up some video cameras with infrared, and check it out. Bats were coming to feed on the hummingbird feeder. If you guys can hear that noise in the background, that's their wings flapping. They can hover a little bit, just like a hummingbird. Anyway, the bats were coming in and drinking all of her nectar, from her sugar water. So nectar feeding bats really important as well for pollination, as we talked about. And then, of course, in Texas, we have insectivores. There's a long list of insects that they eat. This is a hoary bat, a beautiful bat that's found mainly roost in trees. They eat moths. They also eat mosquitoes. We have some cave myotis bats here in Texas, another common species, and one cave myotis can eat 600 mosquitoes in an hour. So that's kind of a reason why we want to keep them around. And there are bats. This is my favorite Texas bat species, a beautiful bat. It's called a pallid bat. Their pale coloring, you can see through their translucent wings. Really, really cool looking bat. And they eat grasshoppers, which in large numbers can cause damage to farmers' crops. They also eat scorpions and centipedes. They're immune to the scorpion sting, so even if the scorpion stings them, they're not going to care. They're going to keep chomping down on the bat. And here's another really cool fact about these bats. So these bats are found out in West Texas. And when we were out doing surveys, we were catching these bats, and we kept seeing pollen on them. And we knew that sometimes they roosted on cactus. So we thought that they were just somehow getting the pollen on them because they were roosting on the cactus and coming in contact with their flowers. So we set up video cameras around the cactus, and what we found is that these bats were not only roosting on the cactus, they were feeding on the nectar in the flowers. And it's the first ever recorded instance of an insectivore also feeding on nectar anywhere in the world. So some really cool research. Now, in other countries, there are bats that like to go fishing. We have bats that like to eat frogs. I think frogs are cool, and many of you probably do as well. But this bat feeds on frogs in tropical places. So he searches for frogs, first by using echolocation to track the frogs down, but he will also listen to the croaking sound that the frog makes. And this is what I think is cool about nature. It's something I like to share with kids. So the way that they find out if the frog is poisonous or not is they can differentiate the croaking sound the different species of frogs make. And they'll know if they want to eat it or not. Well, the frogs have adapted the ability to know when bats are flying around them, and they will stop croaking. So it makes it harder for the bats to find the ones that aren't poisonous. So again, nature kind of gives a fighting chance for both the bats and the frogs. And then, of course, vampire bats. I spoke about them a little bit. Only found in Central and South America. They don't suck the blood. If you look really closely here, you can see they do make a bite in the skin of the animal, and then they lick up the blood with their tongue. They produce an anticoagulant in their saliva that keeps the blood flowing on the animal. And many times these animals never even know the bats are there. They sleep through the whole process. Vampire bats have benefited people because medical scientists discovered these blood thinning properties in the vampire bat saliva, and they have now copied it and used it in human heart patients because it helps reduce blood clotting. And I think that Yes, so I'm gonna show you this video. This is a video of some vampire bats feeding on a wild pig. And you'll notice that the pig just stays asleep through the whole process. They never even realize the bats are there. They have heat sensors around their noses where they can detect where blood is flowing more freely. And so that helps them discover where they want to feed on the blood. And then look how cute their little faces are. I guess I'm a little bit biased. I think all bats are cute, but vampire bats kind of get a bad rap, just like all bats do, because people assume that they're going to come and feed on people. But there are 3 species of vampire bats, and 2 of them only feed on the blood of birds. The common vampire bat is the only one that feeds on mammals. And recent research by some graduate students that I know, they studied the stable isotopes in the vampire bats, the blood that they were feeding on, and they found no traces of human blood. So it's very unusual for a vampire bat today to feed on a person. The other interesting thing about vampire bats is they're often feeding down on the ground. So they're on the ground a lot more than other bat species. And it's hard for a bat to just flap their wings and take off from the ground like a bird can do, because most birds, they have hollow bones, but bats' bones are solid. So even though they're small, they're heavy for their size. So vampire bats have adapted the ability to run across the ground, and they will use their wing like a leg and their thumbs like feet, and they'll run across the ground to propel themselves up in the air. And they have kind of an unusual, they look more like a gorilla when they run. I'll share this video with you as well. This is some research that some graduate friends did on some vampire bats. And if you notice, they just kind of, this is a slow motion video, so they look kind of odd, but you can see how they're using their wings like legs and their thumbs like feet. Really, really cool animals. All right, so I talked a little bit about the bats. I'm going to talk just a little mention, because this is my least favorite topic to talk about, are the things that like to come and eat the bats. If you come out to a bat site where you see a whole lot of bats come out of a cave, your bird friends are the ones that like to come and eat my bats. So birds of prey, red-tailed hawks are really common, other types of hawk species as well, falcons, great horned owls will come in when the bats are coming out closer to dark or after. Snakes will come and feed on bats, raccoons and possums and skunks. They wait for bats to hit the ground. Really kind of have a little buffet waiting for them if they wait outside of a cave entrance. The most common predator that we have, though, are these beetles that you can see right here. It's called a dermestid beetle. These beetles are found in our caves. They're found in the tunnel. Very important to the ecology because they mainly feed off of the bacteria in the bat guano. So by eating that bacteria, they're helping with decomposition, which you guys imagine millions of bats all pooping in the same place. The guano piles just keep growing and growing, right? So these beetles are helping decompose the bat guano. But in addition to eating that bacteria in the bat guano, they are also flesh-eating beetles. So in this picture right here, you can see a bat that unfortunately fell to the ground in the roost. And because it didn't crawl away or climb away fast enough, all those beetles got on top of the bat. And there's so many of them that the bat gets too heavy and it can't move it anymore. And within an hour or so, a medium-sized bat like this will be totally skeletonized. And it sounds like a horrible way to go. And I don't like to imagine it happening. So something that makes me feel a little bit better is that if an adult bat fell to the ground in the roost and it did not move away or fly away really quickly, that means something was probably already wrong with that bat. It was sick, it was injured in some way, and it was probably going to die in a matter of time. So again, that's that balance of nature. Not too many bats fall to the ground in the roost, so this doesn't happen very often. Now I do have a video. It's a time-lapse video. It's of a dead bat that I put in with the beetles so you could see how the process works, especially with kids. They love to see this kind of thing. If you don't want to watch, close your eyes or turn away. But it's pretty amazing to see the process. Again, remember this bat is dead. I did not use a live bat. They eat everything, and the bat's not breathing right there. Those are beetles that are already up underneath it. They eat everything except for the fur and the bones. It's a pretty incredible process. A lot of taxidermists have these beetles that used to use to clean off specimens that they use. I had a small colony for a while that I used to clean off some skulls and things that I use for educational purposes. Really amazing. You can lift it out and it looks like it has been washed clean. It's totally white. So just an amazing, pretty cool natural predator out there. All right. So here in Texas, we have bats living in all kinds of places. I'm sure some of you have been to Congress Street Bridge in Austin. A lot of our highway bridges are built in an exact way to attract bats because the highway department knows how important bats are to agriculture here in Texas. Of course, there are a bunch of bats living in caves all around central Texas. In other countries, there are bats that live on the outside of trees. These are some straw-colored fruit bats that are found in Australia. And then here in Texas, we have some tree roosting bats as well. These are mainly found out in East Texas, although they do migrate through Central Texas on occasion. This is the hoary bat that I told you about earlier. There are bats that roost up in hollow trees. Angelina National Forest out in East Texas, this is one of our endangered species, the Rafinesque big-eared bat, only found out in that area of Texas. In other countries, bats roost in interesting places. This is a bat that's found in Borneo, and it actually roosts inside a carnivorous plant. And the plant would not survive without the bat because the plant exists and gets nutrients from the bat guano that it drops into that plant. So it's helping that plant grow. So they have a symbiotic relationship, which was pretty cool. Now these little guys are found in Honduras. They're known as tent makers, Honduran white bats. If you check it out, they roost inside these leaves. So they'll chew along the center stem of the leaf so that the leaf folds over and it makes a tent. And this is what they look like. Imagine you're trying to go find them out in these jungle areas. I want if you guys can see this video. Keep watching and I want to see if you can find. So first you see there's evidence. The bats have been there. So along the stem of the leaf. And see if you can see the little bats. There they are. Check it out. Tiny little cotton balls. So really, really amazing looking animals. And this is what they look like up close. When they're born, their body size is just about the size of my thumbnail. And then once they start getting their fur in, it's gray and then it turns into these really bright, pretty white color, and they get these fluorescent coloring in their noses and ears. So really amazing bat species. And then here in Texas, we also have bats that roost in cliff crevices, especially out in Big Bend area. 21 species hang out in that area, my favorite part of Texas. They also roost in buildings. I get calls every year. Bats are in my attic. Bats are hanging out under my porch eaves. They're in my pool umbrella. They only need a space about, about an inch wide to be able to get inside, and they can find their way into places. Usually during migration, bats will roost in these temporary places, but if you leave them alone, usually they'll find their way and move on within a week or two. And this is a group of pallid bats roosting in an attic. And then just really quickly, I'm just going to mention a few of our Texas species. We are in the battiest state of the United States of America. Texas has the greatest diversity of bat species out of any state, with 32 of the 47 species. So I like to brag about that to all of my friends, that I'm from the battiest state. We have the largest and the smallest bats in the United States, the Western Mastiff bat is the largest, and it has a wingspan of about 20 inches. In comparison to the American Peristrel, used to be known as the Pipistrel, as Patsy and I talked about earlier, and they have a wingspan of about 4 or 5 inches. So quite a variety in terms of size of bats here in Texas. I talked about the endangered species. Remember, one of them has been taken off. We're very happy that the Mexican long-nosed bat is still around because it is the #1 pollinator of the agave cactus. That's what we get tequila from, people, so really important bat species. This is one of our state threatened species. A beautiful bat called a spotted bat, found out just in a little area of West Texas. You can see in this map. I've never caught one of these and wish I could. A beautiful bat. Down along the coastal areas, we have some bats that roost in palm fronds, the southern yellow bat. Unfortunately, they like the dead palm fronds, so people tend to cut those down and end up killing these bats when they do so. So we're working hard to protect their habitats down in South Texas as well. And then, of course, our most common bat species, the Mexican free-tailed bat, migrate here from Mexico. You can see they have a free hanging tail. That's why they're called a free-tailed bat. They're also known as a Brazilian free-tailed bat. If you read scientific journals, that's what you're going to hear them referred to. But here in Texas, we still call them the Mexican free-tailed bat. Most of these bats are migrating to Texas. They're coming here pregnant. While they're pregnant, while they're feeding their pups, they have to eat the equivalent of their weight in insects every single night. So they want to be here where their food source is, which I'll show you in just a moment. But in this picture, you can see this is a mother bat, and this is her little baby. She gives birth to a pup that weighs 1/3 of her weight. So if you compare that to a person, if the woman weighed 120 pounds, it would mean her baby would have weighed 40 pounds when it was born. So their babies are born really big because they have to grow really fast. Within 4 weeks, this little guy's going to have all of his fur, and he's going to be almost the size of his mother already. And they're weaned by the time they're about 5 to 6 weeks old. They're on their own, having to find their own food. And then just to show you how amazing and intelligent these bats are, this is one mother bat, and everything else you see in this picture are baby bats. Baby bats roost in an area of about 500 baby bats per square foot. So as you can see, they're all born hairless. They're all this kind of pinkish brown color. I can tell you from doing research that they all smell alike and sound alike to my human ears and my nose. But to this mother, her baby smells different and sounds different than any other pup. She will only feed her baby, and she finds them just by using smell and sound. So it's amazing to think about when you know there are thousands of little baby bats all looking the same and being born at the same time. And as we know, bats are mammals. Their mammary glands are underneath their wings. And so those pups, they're going to benefit from that really rich milk from their mother, and that helps them grow fast and get out there on their own pretty quickly. So Mexican free-tailed bats, they mainly eat moths. The corn earworm and the cotton bollworm moth are their main diet. This is what the moth looks like. They come up to Texas to lay their eggs on corn and cotton crops. And when the eggs hatch out, it turns into this caterpillar right here. And you guys can see what it does to the corn. They eat the cotton boll and the cotton flour. They'll do a lot of damage to apples as well. One Mexican free-tailed bat will eat 40 moths a night. So you can times that, times during the summer months, it's estimated 100 million Mexican free-tailed bats migrate to Central Texas. So the benefit to farmers is immense because farmers don't have to spend as much on pesticide, which means that we don't spend as much. Another example that I like to share, because I think it's pretty amazing, is if any of you are familiar with Love Creek Orchards, which is over by Bandera, he has over 200 bat houses around his orchard, an apple orchard, for nighttime protection from insects, and then purple martin houses to protect his apples during the daytime. And with the combination of those two natural controls, he doesn't have to use any pesticides. So he has totally organic apples, and I think that's something to brag about. So that's why we want to keep the bats around. If you think about Bracken Cave, which I'm sure all of you have probably been there, are familiar with it, right outside of San Antonio, up to 20 million bats. They estimate that they eat close to 250 tons of insects a night. So here in Texas, we're very fortunate. Across the United States, most of our bats are eating a variety of insect pests. Back in 2011, they did a study to give an economic value to bats. And in their study, they proved that in 1 year, bats across the United States are saving farmers about $22.9 billion that they don't have to spend on pesticide because the bats are doing such a great job. So that's what I'm going to end with. Hopefully I've kind of passed on some information about the bats, and I hope I've made a few bat lovers out there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I want to show you a few of some of my bat things that I have here. Let's see. All right. So you guys tell me if you can, or Patsy or someone can maybe tell me if they can see this or not. This is, remember the hoary bat that I told you about earlier? So all of these specimens, can you see it okay?
Uh-huh.
Okay, good. So all of these specimens that I'm going to show you here, they were in an animal rehab place, and they died of natural causes. We tried to get them better, and for some reason they didn't get better. And so I've taxidermied them, and I like to show them. I have a variety of some of their Texas species, just especially to give kids an idea of the variety of bat species. And you can see she's got this beautiful multicolored fur. That's why she's called a hoary bat. You can see really well too their thumbs at the top of their wings, which is just, that gives them an amazing ability. Sometimes they'll hang from their thumbs when they're hanging out.
Yeah, move it back just a little bit from the screen. Yeah, now you can see it better. Uh-huh, point it out again, yeah.
So here are their thumbs right here. And then if you look at the different coloring in their fur, which is pretty amazing. So all different bat species, some of them have a whole lot of fur. They're really furry. Some of them, their fur is more like felt. Mexican free-tail bats, their fur is really fine. It's not as thick as the hoary bat. This little guy right here, unfortunately, his mother died before he was weaned. And this is a baby Mexican free-tailed bat. And he's really tiny, but think about this. Even though he's small, he's still a third the size of his mother. And you can see he's already getting his fur in and everything, even though he's not maybe just a week or two old. The other thing I like to say about this is about the size of a full-grown adult bumblebee bat, to kind of give you some variety. And then I also have, this is a bat that's found in Malaysia. It's called a glossy horseshoe bat. And I like to show, I know I'm going to get a little bit closer, and hopefully the glare is not too bad, but he's got beautiful orange fur, really cool looking ears, just to show you some of the variety. And then remember the fruit bats that we talked about. I don't have a giant flying fox, but I do have an Egyptian fruit bat. Again, these are bats that unfortunately, even though they're not native to Texas, a lot of times zoos, when the bats get old, they don't want to have to care for them anymore, and they end up in rehab places. So this is an Egyptian fruit bat. And you guys can see really well their bone structure, and you can see their thumbs really well. And if you look really closely, a lot of kids think he looks like a werewolf. And remember, he's a fruit eater, and I like to explain, I'll ask the question of kids, why do fruit bats have sharp teeth? They're not going to peel the fruit like we do, so they need to have those teeth to be able to tear through the skin of the fruit. So again, just some variety in the types of bats. And then one last thing I want to share with you guys is just to kind of give you an idea. This is the wing bone, just one from one of the really big flying foxes. And you can see how big it is in comparison to the bats that I just showed you that we have here in Texas. And then to give you a comparison, this is the skull of one of the fruit bats. And I know you can't see it in there because it's too small, but you just can compare that to the species that I showed you. So bats are such a variety of bats. You know, that's why I fell in love with bats when I was a kid. I used to lay on my aunt's trampoline and watch them come out of the chimney at her old ranch house. And I was always amazed by them. And then once I started studying them and learning how important they are to the environment, it just made me want to learn more about them. So I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Okay, well, we have some for you. I'll just kind of go down here, and I do want to reiterate that we have recorded the session. So if you want to listen to it again and see these wonderful pictures, this is great. We'll have them on, we'll have a link to the recording posted in a couple of days on the Bear Audubon website, bearaudubon.org. So lots of compliments here for you, but there's some questions.
Well, she doesn't want to hear any
She wants to hear all of these. I'm going to go up to the front. Let's see. Thank you for checking on me to make sure I was recording. I love it because sometimes we forget. Okay, now let me just see. Here's a good one. Are bat population numbers stable or declining?
Yes.
Good question. It's hard to say for sure. I would say here in Texas that they're stable, mainly because we do notice, I have to speak specifically to Old Tunnel. We do notice fluctuations in the population numbers, but mainly it has to do with drought conditions, as Patsy and I were talking about before we got started. The bats will move around a lot more during drought conditions, so our population may look smaller, but the next year, the same numbers will come back again once we get better rain and things like that. So I would say that they're stable. However, as a caveat, unfortunately, 2 years ago, I discovered a bat, Mexican free-tailed bat at Old Tunnel that had, was tested positive for evidence of the fungus for white nose.
Oh no.
Now, it was not the disease, but last year, unfortunately, some of our cave myotis bats up in the Panhandle did test positive for the disease. And so that, you know, could change things in terms of our stable numbers or not. But right now, I would say they're stable. Yeah.
So with 1,397 species, the story is probably different for each one, right?
Yeah, true that. Yeah.
Okay, and then here's another one. Why is bat guano rich in nitrates?
That's a great question.
Yes.
And I really don't have an answer for that. To be honest, I've never had that question asked of me before. I guess it's just like any kind of composting kind of material that will help things grow. So you have to think that, you know, I'm trying to think of a nice way to say,
Go ahead. We're all big kids.
Poop or whatever, it can help things grow. And, you know, that's just a part of what the bat guano is. Now, one of the reasons why ammonia concentrations can build up in bat guano is that a byproduct of the decomposition process of the beetles breaking down the bat guano produces ammonia. So that can also contribute to some of that composition of the bat guano once it's starting to decompose.
Do they pee? Do bats pee?
They do. And remember, that's a great question. And believe it or not, I had to do some research because a kid asked me that, and they asked me how they didn't get it all over themselves. Because they're hanging upside down, right? So I did some in-depth research. And bats will turn and hang from their thumbs when they're ready to urinate. So it's falling down and not over them. Now, for the guano purposes, it's like mouse droppings. Most of the time, it's a little hard pellet, and it would just roll off of them. So, yeah.
Great, good to know. Do the different species here in Texas roost in the same area? Would you find Mexican free-tail and cave myotis roosting together?
Yes.
Those are two of the most common bat species, and they do often roost together in the same places. And sometimes we'll also find evening bats or tricolored bats roosting where free-tails roost. But not necessarily all of the species would roost in the same kinds of conditions because they like differing temperature and humidity ranges. So it's different
Okay.
based on what type of roost it is. Yeah.
Okay. Here's a good question. What's the impact of noise pollution on bats that use echolocation, maybe from planes and cars and other sources in the environment?
Sure. I'm not sure that noise would interfere with their echolocation. I guess it could, but because it's at a higher frequency and they're hearing it differently than we would, I wouldn't think that those types of noises would interfere with their echolocation. However, noise does affect their flight patterns and their activity. They can be deterred by noise, but people will bring up the fact there's 1.5 million of them roosting under the Congress Street Bridge. Cars are going over it. People are all around it. There's all kinds of noise. But bats get used to their environments just like we do. And those same bats will come back there year after year, and many times their offspring follow them back to the same roost. And so bats get used to their environments. And I always tell people who talk to me about that at Old Tunnel that we have country bats. And then there's the city bats that are used to the noise. But of course, noise can affect populations.
Well, we have them right here at the Pearl, under Highway 35. They roost in the expansion joints of the freeway, and you know how quiet that must be.
Exactly right.
So they pretty well have a good tolerance for things.
Yeah.
And we have someone who commented here that they've seen grackles eat bats under the McNeil Bridge in Round Rock.
Oh, really? I didn't know that, but that's interesting.
There you go. We all learned something here. And I think, let's see if
Another nasty bird.
and lots of nice comments about your photos and so forth.
Thanks.
And we interpret bats a lot at the San Antonio Zoo. And we always tell people you can't not like bats if you like margaritas.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
The question here, you mentioned it too, the current status of white nose syndrome in Texas.
Yes. So, yeah, it was unfortunate that the disease has been discovered. The thing about our bats is that Myotis and Freetails, they do go into kind of a form of hibernation, but not for very long extended periods of time. Freetails don't hibernate at all. They're active all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's unlikely that they will die from the disease like other hibernating species where it's colder. Because the thing is they wake up and then they use up all their energy stores and they die of starvation. So they don't anticipate that that's going to happen with our bats. But they could spread it to other species that do need to, store their energy stores. So lots of great conservation efforts going on. In other places, they're protecting in species that might be endangered and disappearing by providing artificial roosts. But two things I want to quickly say is there are a lot of research and conservation efforts, and one of the projects involves a naturally occurring bacteria that they grew next to the fungus in the lab, and it caused the fungus to stop growing.
So
penicillin. Maybe trying to figure out a way, to aerosol it and use it in a cave environment. But, a lot of testing has to be done. And then the other thing is, one of the ways we can tell if a bat has had the fungus and the disease is you look for scarring in their wing membrane by using a UV light. And they found in the lab that over time, the UV light made the fungus stop growing. So they're going to try bigger versions of these UV lights to make sure they don't harm anything else in the cave. And that might be a solution as well. So, and then thirdly, I'm sorry, one more thing is some bats in the Northeast where this was first discovered in 2006. Some of those species seem to be building up a resistance to it over time. So maybe those traits will be passed down to their offspring. So
awesome. There's one more question. It says, do bats have only one call, like when they're using it for echolocation, or do they have other calls for other purposes?
Barbara French, who was a bat rehabber for a long time, did some research, and it's called Bat Talk. Now their echolocation calls, they do echolocate at different frequencies, but I would still say it's the same call that they're making, but it's a different frequency. However, they also do a lot of vocalizations when they're in the roost. They have mating calls. They have calls that just hanging out with their friends calls. So if you're interested, you can look that up, Bat Talk. It's really pretty interesting, and it's different ways that they sound and talk to each other. It's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure that you thrill and enthrall all the kids you talk to, and you have
Kids of all
thrilled
ages.
kids of all ages have been thrilled and enthralled tonight. And I
Awesome.
want to take just a minute before everybody has to leave. I want to put up some, if people have kids that they would like to talk to about bats, there's some wonderful little books, and one of them is co-authored by Nida, Frankie the Free-tailed Bat. Yay!
Yay.
It's a delightful little book. You used to have to buy it, but now you can download it from Texas Park and Wildlife. If you just Google Frankie the Free-tailed Bat, you can download it right to your own computer and either print it or read it off your iPad or whatever. And then there's another one, Batty About Texas, which is a little bit more basic. Like if you're going to read it to a younger child, tells a little bit about bats. And then Bat Loves the Night, which is the pipistrelle, which is what it used to be called. That's a bat we have here in Texas. And then even though we don't have them in Texas, one of the most beloved books for children is about a little fruit bat named Stella Luna. And it's a sweet story. It may not all be biologically correct, but it's such a sweet story about how nature works together. And it's another little book that's, because we want kids to grow up with the idea that bats are important in nature and they're not gonna bite us and get in our hair and do all kind of terrible things. But we also want to let people know that if they find a bat on the ground or seem to be sick or something, not to touch it, because they can transmit diseases. And if they're sick, that's not a time that you want to handle an animal. Is that right, Nida?
That is correct. Yeah. Exactly right.
With that, I want to thank everybody for coming, and if we'd love to have you come and talk bats to us again. And do you want to say how to come out to the old tunnel?
Oh yeah, sure. That's a good point.
Okay.
So as Patsy mentioned earlier, we have very limited viewing right now due to the pandemic and social distancing guidelines. So everyone that visits Old Tunnel for the bat viewing is required to have a permit, and they are only available online. We can't do them at the park. So the best way to get one is to go to our Old Tunnel Facebook page. And I've provided a link that takes you right to Old Tunnel's booking page. And so you don't have to go through all the mess of the website.
Good.
Yeah, because it can be very confusing, and I know it, and I'm sorry about that. But one thing to be aware of is that it books up really fast. The lower viewing area, which is only open on Thursday through Sunday night, is already booked through the first week of October, just because we only can allow 10 people down there now. Now there's a lot of availability at the upper viewing area, and it's still a good view from up there too. So just check out our Facebook page. That's the best way to get information. So
Okay. Well, thank you so much. It was
Thanks, everyone.
fabulous. Appreciate
fun.
it. Yay!
I'll see you guys around somewhere.
You bet. Thanks so much.